Let's breathe, people. Hello there, Cybersmith.
Hello.
How are you?
Allow notifications. I'm okay. I don't see you. Do you see me?
I do see you, albeit you
Better
are
probably to
very,
comb.
you're very 8-bit.
Yeah, should have. You should probably comb my hair, boys. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I was just chittering. As I said, the connection is not great. It's a bit dodgy right now. My area is transitioning between 4G and 5G, so things are a little unreliable. But I can hear you at least.
Yes. Okay. Okay. That's well. I can see you, and you're looking delicious, albeit a bit 8-bit, if I'm honest. But it's fine. We can manage this.
Yes,
Right.
indeed. I can't see you at all. Would it help if I pop my camera off? I don't know if there's
No,
a
no.
way
Well, I
to.
can't. I can't get two feeds of the camera. No, put your camera back on. I can't. So I'm on my OBS, if that makes sense. So you won't be able to see
Um,
me. But you trust me, you're not missing much anyway. It's fine.
okay, I'll pop mine off then because that at least reduces a bit of my upload bandwidth. So that
Oh,
should save me a bit.
okay. That's fine. Hello there, Cybersmith. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about you?
I am the Cybersmith. You may know me from some of my thoughts online. I've been known to comment on issues of science, technology, politics, and philosophy. Um, and perhaps for my benefit, you could tell me a bit about you. You seem
Oh,
to have me at a disadvantage in that respect.
well, I'm Kevin Logan. I'm a leftist from the UK, as you probably are able to tell by the accent. Yeah,
Indeed.
yes. I saw you debate my good friend Gremlow a couple of weeks ago, and then
Indeed.
Keffels, and I thought this guy is fascinating. I need to talk to him because he's wrong about everything, literally everything. So I thought I'll get him on and we'll talk about some stuff. And I'm glad you did. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess today I'm wrong about everything. The main topics from, if we're going based on the Gremlow discussion, the main thing I discussed with Gremlow was Hobbes's idea of the Leviathan, and specifically what happens when the sovereign stops fulfilling the duty of protection to the subject. When the subject no longer receives protection from the sovereign, my contention was that the subject reverts to a state of nature and is therefore entitled to defend his own rights, even if, though we acknowledge it's preferable for the sovereign to do that. It is preferable to have a state of affairs in which the sovereign is enforcing people's rights and maintaining
I,
fair play between all parties. When the sovereign reneges on that duty, it's then the individual subject's right, even though we'd prefer that the sovereign manage it. So that was the main point of my contention with Gremlow. Would you disagree with that?
I'll be honest with you. I had not prepared for the Gremlow related chat. I was just bringing that up as a way of saying I'd heard you a couple of times. I mainly wanted to talk to you about some of the contentions you had with Keffels, if I'm entirely honest.
Okay, so that was more the discussion of monarchism then, as opposed to republicanism.
Amongst other things, yes, yes. I mean, the thing that sprang forward for me was your defence of Winston Churchill, which we can get into a little bit if you want. But I have to ask you up top, just because it'll be in my head if I don't ask you. You did mention in that discussion with Keffels, and it wasn't really touched upon very much, although it was almost a throwaway line. You said, and I don't want to get too personal about it, but you said your kinks inform your politics. Yes?
I said I can't completely rule out the possibility they
Right.
do, but then again, no one can. No one
What?
can say. No one can say for certain what aspects of their mind affect other aspects of their mind.
Well,
So
that's
it's impossible to make an authoritative statement on that matter.
okay.
No one can say for certain why. Nobody can say for certain that some aspect of their mind has not influenced some other aspect. But so that is an unreasonable burden. My point is that for Kettles to demand that would be an unreasonable burden, because I don't think anyone can honestly say with confidence that some aspect of their mind has not affected some other aspect.
Okay. Do you think that your kinks have informed your politics, and if so, which kinks have informed which political
I don't
viewpoint?
I don't really think it matters politics. The arguments I pulled really matters how I arrived at them.
No, it doesn't necessarily. I just think it's interesting because I'd never even considered that sort of
Well,
connection,
that's the
if you
thing.
will.
I don't. I'm not. I wouldn't necessarily say any of us really know why things. We can't really trace any individual thought to its origins. Apple's contention was, in my argument, an unfair contention. Nobody can reasonably state with any degree of confidence that they know exactly where the thoughts in their own heads arrived from. We can't trace thoughts back to their origins because, simply put, human minds are not that organized.
Fair enough. Yeah. I have to ask you about this. Do you actually want to own a human pet?
Do you have to ask me about this?
I kind
This
of.
is why
I
I'll say,
kind of
although I
do.
disagreed with Gremlow, I rather respect him for having not brought that up. That's
It
I
is.
made
It
one
is.
hypothetical I made one hypothetical thought experiment 6 years ago,
Well, no,
and
you
it's been
say
brought
that.
up
This.
constantly ever
No, you
since.
say that, but then you did kind of defend the concept of the human pet in the conversation with Keffels, didn't you? So it wasn't just a thought experiment. It seems to me.
Did I defend the concept
You
with
did
Kettles? I
kind
don't believe
of.
I did.
You did. You did. At least devil's advocate for it, I think, which suggests that whilst you might not necessarily want to admit it, and that's fine, it's a very personal thing, I
I
suppose.
don't think I did. I don't think I did bring up it in a devil's advocate context. What I said, I believe, what I said with Keffels was it's irrelevant because it's a thought experiment from several years ago. This would be like if Schrodinger were trying to discuss quantum mechanics and everyone kept calling him, "Hey, aren't you that guy who tried to poison a cat?" It's completely unreasonable.
Okay, so you don't think that human pets are acceptable? Just to absolutely
I
rule
didn't
that
say
out.
that. I said that it's. I didn't say that. I said that it is off topic. It is irrelevant
Okay, well, I'm just
to a
asking you.
discussion
Look,
of
I think
politics.
I could say
Why?
I think the
Do you
ownership
ask this with everyone you
I
discuss?
I think the ownership of human beings, either for manual labour or just pleasure, is wrong, and I don't think that's a ridiculous standard to hold another human being to. So you can leave it hanging there, and people will continue to ask the question, or you can say, "Oh, actually, no, I don't think the ownership of human beings is okay. It's up to you."
No, I don't think it's at all reasonable because I fundamentally disagree with the premise that it is a reasonable thing to bring into an unrelated political discussion. I
Well,
certainly didn't. I brought it up as a thought experiment in a post that was explicitly about that. Everyone else seems to have
okay,
just
but
brought it
look,
up in any discussion with me under any circumstances,
okay, but
which
I'm
I
not.
don't think is at all intellectually reasonable.
I think it absolutely is. I think in order to understand your moral positioning and where you put yourself in terms of your politics, I think having something as basic as is human individual freedom actually important to you? Because you call yourself a libertarian, and surely one of the basic liberties that a human being has is a liberty to their own body, yes?
Well, we agree that that is a liberty that can be treated away. The most fundamental liberty is the liberty to live, isn't it?
Well,
But
yeah, but part of that
does
would
that
be
necessarily mean that we're opposed
to
to,
own your own
say,
body.
voluntary Does that mean we would forbid, say, voluntary euthanasia? Do we forbid
No, no,
suicide?
no, no, absolutely. Well,
In
look,
a,
I mean, that's
so
just,
a fundamental prerequisite of owning a thing is being able to give it away.
yeah, exactly, yeah. No, that's fine. But that's to give it away to nothing, in essence, right? Because you're killing yourself, you're ending it. The ownership ceases. I think it's fundamentally wrong to allow someone to give up ownership of themselves to another person. I think that would be entirely immoral because then the person owning it is owning another human being, which is fundamentally disgusting, like really fucking disgusting. And the fact that you're equivocating about it being an unrelated topic. No, if you're going to call yourself a libertarian, a basic concept is a person owns themselves, not that they're owned by another person.
So your conception of libertarianism isn't so much rights-based, you just don't like the idea of someone else having the authority. You're only grudgingly conceding that people should own themselves because for lack of any better
I'm not grudgingly accepting anything. I'm holding you to the standard that you hold,
well, no,
in theory, should hold yourself to. You call yourself a libertarian, and yet you're not. That's the point.
Your position is that you're not necessarily opposed to suicide because that is giving up self-ownership to nothingness.
Yes.
So your position isn't actually that people having self-ownership is intrinsically good. If it were, you would oppose the idea of suicide. You don't mind people losing self-ownership. What you mind is the idea of someone else acquiring ownership.
Yeah. Yeah, I think slavery is bad.
I think that is my position. You're not actually a libertarian. You're just an anti-hierarchalist.
I never call myself a libertarian. I said you call yourself a libertarian, and
yes,
you don't hold yourself to that standard. You don't fundamentally believe in the people owning themselves. Yes. Which is not, it's fundamentally an anti-libertarian position to have.
I believe in the position of freedom, which includes the freedom to give up freedom. If
so fundamentally,
it's no freedom at all.
Let's not beat around the bush. You fundamentally don't oppose the concept of human pets, then?
I believe it's categorically irrelevant whether I oppose the position of human pets. If someone wants to be, they can be.
Well, I mean, look, anyone who wants to be a human pet, I can give you Cybersmith's contact details, and you can exchange your ownership with him if you wish.
Denying them that is essentially not libertarianism. It's just anti-hierarchy.
Well, I'm not a libertarian. I'm anti-hierarchy. Yeah, I will absolutely concede that point. Yes, I'm saying you're not a libertarian either.
I am a libertarian. I'm just not an anti-hierarchicalist.
Which is not a libertarian. It's fundamentally you're not a libertarian. You're not. I mean, that's the. I was going to save that bit for later, I suppose. But you're not a libertarian, obviously.
Why not? Isn't the most fundamental thing you can do with? Isn't the most fundamental prerequisite of ownership the capacity to sell? Do you own something you can't give away?
I mean, okay. I mean, you're making cool arguments for slavery right now, which is again very cool for a libertarian to do. That's super awesome. What are you talking about, dude? Like, you can rent your body in the sense that who's doing via wage labor or some shit like that. But the idea of permanently selling yourself so that a person can do with you as they wish is ridiculous. And like an idea that I thought had died hundreds of years ago, but apparently not.
You can do it with anything else you own.
Right, but human beings.
Someone else.
Okay, but cars don't have feelings.
So you believe that you do fundamentally believe that there are limits to people's self-ownership, then?
There are limits to everything.
You believe that someone's
obviously, like, human beings don't form cars don't form emotional bonds with other cars, do they? They don't feel pain.
At least they're not capable of expressing it to us, which is an important distinction.
Well, assuming the film series Cars isn't real and that they're not actually sentient creatures in any way.
Cars do not express physical or emotional discomfort.
Exactly, yeah.
To us.
Yeah, exactly.
From that, we may infer that they don't experience it, but that's an inference, and we do have to point out that is an inference.
Oh, okay, but on the basis of that inference, I'm not going to give them the same rights as a human being. Call me crazy, but I don't think that they're worthy of the same rights as us, as living creatures.
I'm not calling
so the idea that one selling a car is equivalent to one selling a human is fucking farcical, and you know that. This is just like philosophical masturbation.
In this case, human being themselves.
Well, any human being, themselves or another. Because once they've sold themselves, you can then sell them up.
You don't actually believe in the idea of self-ownership. You don't actually believe in the idea of self-ownership.
Not absolutist self-ownership, no, because that wouldn't make any fucking sense, would it? There are obviously things that one can do with themselves that would be socially very, very damaging. Like, I don't know, instituting the re-legalization of slavery via selling themselves. That I think would be so socially damaging that should be prohibited. Yes.
Well, we've now made quite a leap. We've gone from you have the right to do something to is it socially damaging? You see the little sleight of hand that you just pulled there? You just completely flipped the terms of the discussion from what do people have the right to do to what is it damaging to society for people to do?
Well, because that's the
That's a very
criterion I
different discussion.
use and everyone
There
else
are all
that's
sorts of
normal
things I think we can
that
agree
people
have a
use.
right to do that it is socially damaging for them to do. For example, I have the right to stand outside of a mosque and set fire to a Quran. I don't because it would be socially damaging. I don't do that. But
No,
I have
you
the
don't,
right
because you
to
get stabbed
as
up.
part of my free expression. I have the right to stand outside of a synagogue and drop bits of bacon onto a copy of the Torah. I don't because it would be socially damaging, but I have the right to.
You've slightly missed.
We've now moved.
You've slightly missed the point
into a
of
very different point of discussion.
Well, not
We're now
remotely.
Social damage, not human rights.
Not remotely, because the way in which we apportion human rights, at least in part, is based on
who is we in this discussion.
Humans. I mean, I know you may not assign yourself in that particular category, but I think you actually are a human being.
So human rights are contingent upon other people's approval on the basis of what they think is damaging to society.
To a degree, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Some people might be okay with slavery. I'm not making any assumptions here about you, but let's just say some people.
Some societies might be damaged by abolishing it. In fact, that's not just a hypothetical. When the British Empire brought an end to the slave trade, it did massive damage to a great many societies. It completely ruined the economy of nations like Dahomey and many other of the principalities of the West African coast.
So again, you're a libertarian.
Were devastated. Yes, and that's why I think it was okay to do that. If you're framing rights in terms of social damage, well then you
are you actually arguing in favour of the transatlantic slave trade on the basis that because of the transatlantic slave trade, economies have been built around that?
No. Would you listen to me? I am saying that you don't get to do this. You don't get to flip the polarity as it suits you. Either rights are things that humans intrinsically have, or rights are things that we bestow upon people because it is convenient for society. If social convenience is the deciding factor,
it's not a dichotomy. It's both.
It can't be, because rights are universal and social harm is contingent on the structure of a society.
They're universal, but they're not throughout time, because, for instance, slavery was legal and now it's not. So it's not universal and eternal, is it?
It may be illegal, but it's widely practiced. In Mauritania, for example, there is an institution of slavery that still exists. It would be socially damaging to Mauritania if you abolished it. They should still abolish it, but it would definitely
it would be economically damaging. But I would argue that actually it would be a liberation for potentially, I don't know how many people in question are there, because you could just have an economy based on wages, which would also still
economies
function.
Don't transition overnight. Massively disrupting the economy by making a large part of it illegal is going to have negative social consequences. There's no way to avoid that.
Okay, but there are things one could do.
You don't get to engage in this. There are.
Yeah, there are things you can do to mitigate all of that. Yeah.
You absolutely, and there are also things you could do to mitigate the social harm that would be caused by, say, the holy book of a religion outside of its place of worship.
Do you think it's remotely equivalent, or even comparable
in that it's a good thing to do?
Do you think it's remotely comparable, the damage done by burning a Quran, to literally slavery? Literally slavery. Do you actually think those two things are comparable? Do you think it's fair to compare those based on the social damage they do?
We are.
Okay, I realise you're being very anal about the word compare there. Do you think it's fair? Okay, don't be an idiot. Do you think it's fair to compare those two things based on the social damage they do? Based on the social damage those two actions do you think that's a fair comparison?
I think it's irrelevant, because I'm not the one deciding things on the basis of social damage. You're the one who believes that rights are contingent upon social damage.
Okay. Do you think pederasty should be legal?
No.
Why?
Because it violates the rights of the child.
Okay, but why should anyone care about that if it's not contingent on anything? You have a right to fuck an adult. Why wouldn't you be able to fuck a child? Is it because
Because
maybe
the
the
child
social
cannot
damage
consent.
that pederasty does in the form of damage to the family unit and to the psychology and physiognomy of the child is
Wait a
so
minute.
extreme that we outlaw that because it's actually just completely bad? Like, it's just a bad
Well,
thing.
because by that definition, if you were by any means able to reduce the social damage, you could then justify doing the thing.
How could
And
you
in
possibly?
fact, some
How could you
societies,
possibly?
by restructuring society so that it's not damaging, some societies, like for example, some of the ancient Greek city-states, didn't just allow it; they encouraged it. Their society was to some extent dependent upon it.
Right, and do you think it might have been socially
This is the
damaging to the
problem with your beliefs.
psychology of the people being fucked as children?
No,
Do you think
how can it
their
be
brains
socially
were so
damaging if the
different?
society is based on it.
Because the psychological damage it
they
does to
used to have-
children is extreme and leads to repercussions into their adulthood. That's the social damage that gets
That's a
done
question.
there. Even if it's legal, it's still wrong.
No, again, stop the goddamn sleight of hand. You don't get to do this. You don't get to flip the modality between individuals and society. If we are talking
Yes, you
about
do.
morality in
Human
terms of
beings
how it
are
affects...
societies are made up of individual
I
units
don't
called
give a
human
damn.
beings. I know you don't care about
I
reality.
don't give
You're
a
a
damn.
libertarian fucking monarchist. Reality doesn't seem to enter your head when it comes to these things. But societies are made up of individuals. So an individual action, whilst might not affect the entire society, lots and lots of individual interactions like that do become the societal
But
change.
damaging an individual psychologically doesn't necessarily damage society.
Yes, it does, because it means you've got, at least in that one interaction, you've got one potentially very, very psychologically damaged human being who might go on to become a police officer who then kills somebody, or might become a fucking serial killer, or might lead to, I don't know, a society where basically war becomes the absolute pinnacle of everything.
Ancient Greece didn't have police officers. Ancient Greece didn't have police officers or serial killers, so it's a moot bloody point.
For a start off, there's no way you know they didn't have serial killers. That's for a start off. That wasn't mentioned in any of the histories.
Name one ancient Greek serial killer.
I'm not saying they did. I'm saying you can't say they didn't. Just because it
So it's
isn't
a
written
moot
doesn't mean it
point.
didn't happen. They were still human beings.
Yes,
I
it
imagine people
does.
did kill people, actually. I'm surprised. It's
That's
such a
pure
weird point of
speculation on your
contention.
part. Ergo,
No,
fake
it's
news.
you're the one speculating. You're the one that said they didn't have serial killers. I'm saying I can't prove either way, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did, because they were human societies, and every human society I've ever heard of had serial
I can't
killers.
disprove Bertrand Russell's... No, it didn't. They're an incredibly recent phenomenon. You can't disprove Bertrand Russell's celestial teapot either, but it's a silly thing to assume is true.
No, because the celestial
entire
teapot has no
idea of
evidence. The celestial teapot has no evidence behind it, and we know it was invented for that specific purpose of pointing that out, whereas serial killers do exist. We know they exist. It's not surprising that they exist. Again, it's not fair to compare those two things,
Then
because
why
one
is
is
there no
impossible,
documented
or one
evidence
is
of them?
very, very improbable, and one is almost certain.
Then if it's so certain, and we have so much documentation from the time period...
We don't have that much
name
documentation
one
from the
ancient
period.
Greek serial.
The life of the
We have
average
lots of
person in ancient
documentation.
Greece is not that well known, actually.
The average person didn't matter. I mean, name one serial
Exactly.
killer of people in ancient Greece who mattered.
Well, I can't name you a single serial killer from ancient Greece because that doesn't mean anything. It's not... Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point being is that if you psychologically damage an entire strata of society by fucking them as children, they might go on to become warmongering lunatics, which is what happened. I'm not saying that's definitely why it happened that way. I'm just saying it probably didn't help.
Your society is based on producing warmongering lunatics. That's not actually a form of harm, then. This is the problem.
It is.
You do not seem to
I think the
understand that there
oceans
could be
of
things
blood being
that
spilled
are
by the
bad for
ancient Greeks was a
individual
bad
people.
idea, actually. I don't think that was a productive thing, no.
No, it was an incredibly good idea because that's what their society was based on. You do not seem to be capable of grasping this reality. There can be instances, many instances, common instances, where what is good for an individual and what is good for a society differ. That is the problem with your conception of rights. You don't get to flip between this modality of rights are based on the individual and then rights are based on what's good for society. Those two things can be completely in contrast.
Okay, so if it was good for a society to endorse pederasty, that would be fine. You'd be okay with that. If that had positive outcomes.
It would still be immoral to do.
Why? It's
It
good.
would
It's
still
good
be
for
immoral
everyone.
because
It's fantastic for the society. Why?
It's good for the
Do you
society.
want the society to be hurt?
But it's bad for that person.
Okay.
Yes, if it's hurting individual people's rights.
So,
I'm sorry,
hang on,
dude,
hang on, shush, just for a second, right? So you're apportioning the rights of the child there based on the damage it's doing to a society or the damage it does to the individual, not because they have some inherent sense of it, right?
I'm basing it on the individual's rights. Would you listen to my arguments instead of assuming that I share your worldview?
I know you don't share my worldview. Your worldview is fucking mental. I'm fully aware that me and you don't see eye to eye on stuff. That's fine.
My worldview is considered on rhetorical sleight of hand, where you switch out societies and carry out individuals and never acknowledge the fact that they're not the same thing.
You broke up there. You want to repeat that? Sorry.
Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. My worldview is consistent. Your worldview appears to be based on a rhetorical sleight of hand, where you switch between things that are good for society and things that are good for people, and never acknowledge that those two things aren't aligned. Yes, sometimes a thing can be good, even if it is bad for a society. For example, the Aztecs had a society based on human sacrifice. It was good when the conquistadors put a stop to that. It was bad for Aztec society, but it was good morally to stop the human sacrifice.
Do you think it was good? Do you
think it was good that the society are not the same thing?
Do you think it was good that the conquistadors then wiped out the Aztecs? Was that morally good?
Well, omelets and eggs.
See, you usually say that's a joke or a shit post, but I think you're actually okay with the genocide of the.
They wiped out the.
Yeah, I think you're okay with the genocide of them.
When you say genocide, what do you mean by this? Are there still people descended from the Aztecs? Yes. Does the Aztec civilization still exist? No. And that's good because, and I can't emphasize this enough, it was a civilization based on human sacrifice.
Well, I would argue, given the actions of the conquistadors, that European civilizations at the time were based on human sacrifice, just in a less direct way. If you're going to go around killing loads of people, I sort of don't give a fuck if you do it ceremonially on the steps of a pyramid, or whether you do it firing cannons into people armed with sticks.
So you don't see a moral difference between one armed fighter killing another armed fighter on the battlefield when both men have consented to be there.
Is that all that happened? Hang on. Whoa. Time out, Home Slice. Firstly, consenting to be there is rather a moot point considering they weren't supposed to be there in the first place. They were invaders. Secondly,
what do you mean they weren't supposed to be there?
As in...
What do you mean supposed to be there?
As in it wasn't land that they had ever lived on before. They turned up and stole that shit. That's what I mean by that.
No, they conquered it.
Yeah, they stole it.
They won it in war.
Yeah, they killed the people that were there, genocided them, right?
That's how nations exchange territory.
You're not, well, again, you're not a libertarian. You're just a fascist who hasn't worked that out yet, or is lying, one of the two. Okay? And secondly...
No, I am a libertarian. I don't...
You're not remotely a libertarian. You're literally saying
extends to the state's right.
You're literally saying that you can just go in and steal other people's shit. That's not a libertarian position.
I'm saying that one state can steal another state's shit because states aren't people and don't have
but people live in states. States exist via the conduit of things called people. You go into a place, you steal the things, and you kill the people there. That is not a libertarian action.
I don't see why not.
Because you're killing innocent fucking people. What are you talking about? Do you think they just killed people in battle? Soldiers? No, they slaughtered women and children and the elderly, the sick. They killed every motherfucker.
Give me evidence of this.
What, that the conquistadors killed innocent people? Are you fucking joking?
The conquistadors killed unarmed civilians.
Yes, they did. We know they did. We know absolutely they fucking did. From their own records, yes.
You won't mind giving a citation, perhaps an instance of Cortez killing an unarmed civilian?
I didn't say Cortez did
Maybe you have evidence of
Pizarro
doing it?
Cortez was the fucking leader of the expedition, okay? I'm not saying he personally went down and did it. I'm saying the conquistadors killed innocent fucking people. Hitler didn't put Jews in ovens. We still fucking blame him for the Holocaust. What the fuck's wrong with you?
There were not very many conquistadors. There were only, I think, a few hundred. We know their individual names. Please show me the citation that shows an individual conquistador killing an individual Aztec civilian, because that is your contention, and that is what has to be true for it to be bad from a libertarian perspective. I don't believe states necessarily have the same rights that people do. Conquest between states is not bad in the same way that, say, an individual coming and conquering another person would necessarily be.
When a state invades another state and kills people, those people's rights have been trampled on to a permanent extent, yes? They've been killed. They no longer. It doesn't matter which state. State A and State B. State A invades State B. The citizens of State B get fucking killed, or at least some of them do. That is not a libertarian action. State B, the citizens of State B did nothing to State A, and yet they've been killed. Yeah, that happens all the time throughout human history.
Are you going to listen to what I'm going to say here, or is this a waste of time?
Please do.
If states, that's why I think most libertarians do make a distinction between actions taken against soldiers and actions taken against civilians. And that's why we have this concept of war crimes. Yes, targeting civilians, bad. Targeting enemy soldiers is okay. Now, you may say, what if those soldiers were conscripted? Well, then their rights were violated, but they weren't violated by State A. They were violated by State B. And this is the distinction you have to point out. If one state is taking state property from another state, well, we have to ask, who is the specific individual being offended here? Now, in the case of monarchism, we could make the case that the state is the king's individual property, but we can't make that case in a republic. It's in the very name of republic, from the Latin res publica, literally a public matter. There is no person having the rights infringed here. If conscripts die, well, that is the fault of the person who conscripted them. I am opposed to the killing of civilians.
Like the king, who would, in the vast majority of instances of conscription in human history, has been done by a monarch. Yeah?
Citation needed?
The fact that the vast majority of countries that have ever gone to war have had a monarchy. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Republics are A, relatively modern, and B, there have been relatively few of them. The vast majority, the vast majority of states in human history have had some kind of monarch. Yes, like that. Why would you even contend that as a monarchist? Surely that's your argument, is that it works. It's been around forever, right?
But have they been more warmongery?
I'm not even making that argument. I'm just saying that they fucking conscripted people in huge numbers over the course of human history, yes.
I would argue that the majority of conscription that has happened under republics. And I am willing to back this up.
How the fuck are you... Oh, Jesus Christ. What are you talking about?
What was the single biggest instance of conscription in history? I think it was probably the Soviet Union's conscription. That was one of the biggest instances of mass conscription. Okay. And I will point out that in monarchic societies, you're talking about pre-1900 monarchic societies, very few people were soldiers. Most of the population was not conscripted. The idea of mass
very few people have ever been soldiers. The soldiers make up a small percentage of any nation, outside of maybe Sparta or some shit like that. But
a much larger percentage of the population, though, under republics. I think you can absolutely make the case, if you tally it up, the majority of conscripts were conscripted by republics. You have to consider the population dynamics, the number of people conscripted.
We're not even getting into the idea that the fact that monarchies press ganged people, which isn't even just conscription, it's theft. You're just stealing human beings. Republics didn't tend to do that, actually.
How many people were press ganged? Again, let's look at the numbers here.
I don't know exactly, but does it matter? Again, as a libertarian, surely one person being press ganged is too many people, right?
Absolutely, but we have to look in cases of relative badness. The only way to completely avoid all of it would be to...
The idea that you consider yourself a libertarian is fascinating. What are you talking about?
I don't consider myself an anarchist, and the only way to completely get rid of it would be to get rid of all states. But we know that doesn't work because anarchy tends to not be very stable.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. Can we just, as I've sort of touched on in the opener, I wanted to get you on to talk about Churchill, because this is fascinating to me, that you as a, quote, libertarian would would you seem to have a lot of respect and love for old Winnie Churchboy? What's that about?
You mean beside the fact that he's the reason we're not conducting this conversation in German?
How is he the reason for that?
Because he was one of the most ardent advocates for not making a deal with Hitler. He was one of the first people in Europe who realized, yeah, this man is not trustworthy. He is planning to stab everyone in the back with the treaties he's making, and we probably should just bite the bullet and go to war with him now. And of course, everyone ignored Churchill, and then Churchill turned out to be right.
Okay, I mean,
he also fought, and he was also a great historian. He was a great journalist. He fought in the Second Boer War, I believe. So,
is that the one where the British did a genocide against white people in South Africa that he defended?
It wasn't a genocide.
We
didn't kill them.
You kill lots of people, and you, as in people who defend this shit, exported, was it 25,000 Boer men to various parts of the empire to try and stop the breeding population of the Boers. I'd say that's genocidal.
Only when they started cheating, and only when they started cheating so badly that even concentration camps weren't enough. Kissinger had to make some hard choices, but that was the situation he was faced with. That's why you shouldn't have guerrilla warfare, because the only reasonable thing that a state can do against it is to be pretty barbaric. You don't want to blur the distinction between civilians and soldiers.
As a libertarian, you're saying fighting against a colonizer for your own freedom means that that colonizer is allowed to genocide the people because it's cheating.
They weren't fighting for their own freedom, though. They were fighting for the ascendance of their state versus another enemy state.
Well, that's just conflict. Most of them were just farmers. Actually, most of them were just farmers. To be fair, like, I'm not a massive fan of white South Africans. I've made that very clear over the course of time. But most of the people at the time were just homesteaders. They were just farmers. They didn't want to have any fucking state here, there, or anywhere. They wanted to farm their land and maybe make a bit of money and do well for themselves.
They had the Transvaal Republic. That was very much a state. These were not some kind of based anarchists living off the land.
I'm not saying they had a state, and
their state was in conflict with our state.
And so it was okay. It was okay for our state to genocide those people. Is what you're saying as an anarchist? As a libertarian.
I'm saying that when you engage in guerrilla warfare, what you are doing is blurring the distinction between civilian and soldier, which eventually means either the state that you are fighting has to give up,
so they had to starve,
or it has to treat civilians as presumed.
So because
soldiers.
of guerrilla warfare, they had to starve Annie Van Zyl to death in a concentration camp.
What else were they going to do? Legitimately, what else were they going to do?
She was a 7-year-old child, my dude. Are you actually going to die on this hill that they had to starve a 7-year-old child to death? Because...
You know what? You're right. They should have just left her on her homestead when they took her parents to the concentration camps.
How would that have been any less cruel? How would that have been less cruel?
That's sarcasm. I'm saying that would not have been less cruel. That is sarcasm. Yeah. What choice did they have?
Not starve her, feed her some food. Allow her to live.
They could barely supply their own troops. Modern logistics didn't exist at the time. The infrastructure to deliver food to South Africa hadn't existed because we hadn't had a chance to build it yet. You need an empire to build.
Well, maybe if there'd been, say, a group of people there who wanted to farm the land and create their own food in that land, we could have just left them to do that, and that would have been fine, and no one needed to starve to death or be genocided. How about that, champ?
If they hadn't been supporting a guerrilla army.
Because the British were trying to fucking colonise them. What, dude?
That's how the game is played, friendo.
You're not a libertarian. You're just a fascist. You're a might makes right fascist. That's all you are. Please accept that that's the truth.
Makes right fascist. Why would I be supporting Churchill, the guy who shut down the largest fascist movement in history?
Hey, dude. They were a competing colonial empire. That's why he didn't fucking like it. Okay, he was in favour of fucking eugenics and all kinds of race science before the war. He clearly didn't give a fuck about Jewish people, given his statements on that. Okay, he wasn't doing this because he disliked fascism. He was fucking fine with fascism.
Firstly, the eugenics argument. I'm going to address that first. Most people at that point in history were. Do you know why most people turned against it? Because of how Nazi Germany took it to extremes. Now, unless we're expecting Churchill to see the future, then we can't really blame him for not having the same benefit of hindsight that we have, can we?
I would argue that the science was well enough established that any learned person should have seen through it at the time. But regardless, my point
We
wasn't
didn't even
that.
have a concept of
My
DNA
point
at the time.
wasn't.
We didn't even know what haplogroups
My
were.
point was that he wasn't an anti-fascist. He took down a fascist movement whilst simultaneously supporting various other fascist movements around the world. Not because they were fascist. Not just because they were.
Which fascist movements did he support around the world?
He was in favour of. He was fine with Franco in Spain. He was fine with.
He wasn't actively
Salazar
at war with Franco.
in Portugal. He was fine with, I believe, Fulgencio Batista in Cuba. There were various things.
He wasn't supporting those.
He wasn't
groups.
an anti-fascist.
Wasn't at war with them.
He wasn't an anti-fascist. He took down a fascist who was a competitor. That's it.
Are you arguing? What would it have been required for you to... He didn't support those countries. This is where we have to be clear. He did not support those countries. He just didn't want to open up...
Continue to do trade. Hang on, whoa. He continued to do trade when he became Prime Minister.
Yes, because you know what the alternative was? The alternative was blockade them, don't do trade with them, and you know what they're going to do? They're going to immediately join Hitler, and now you've
No. I'm saying after the Second World War, when he became Prime Minister...
He wasn't in power after the Second World War.
In 1951, when he became Prime Minister for the second time, the first time elected, he decided to start up trade again with the fascist regime in Spain. He wasn't an anti-fascist, my dude. He just wasn't. Look, he just wasn't. He took down a fascist regime, at least in part, because they were in the way, not because he actually opposed their fascism. Hello?
I'm fact checking this, googling this again. Internet connection is pretty bad. But
so you cut out completely there. What was? Hello?
Yeah, sorry, it's internet went down a bit. I'm just actually.
You're googling. Okay.
Checking the time here. So when did? I think your fundamental contention is that he them at all during the 5 years he was in power. Is that your contention, that he should have blockaded the Spanish state completely?
He didn't have to blockade anything, but he didn't have to trade with them
1950s.
either. My point isn't that he was necessarily massively pro anything. My point was contending that he took down a fascist regime because he hated fascism, which he clearly didn't hate fascism. He was not an anti-fascist.
Spain was one of the closest and most economically prosperous countries at the time, in large part because it has managed to stay out of the Second World War.
No, it wasn't. It
was still
recovering. It was still recovering from the Civil War at the time. There was no way you could say it was one of the most prosperous. That's not true. That isn't true.
The Spanish miracle. Yes, it was a rising power in Europe during the 1950s.
So fascism. So again, it doesn't even matter. He was okay with fascism. Is my point. He didn't oppose Hitler because he was fascist.
He was a man of practicality. He realized that we actually are not going to be in a good economic state.
So if it had been practical, let's just do a deal with Hitler then. That's what you're asking for. You're saying that the morality of it is irrelevant, yeah? So let's just do a deal with Hitler.
I'm saying that when you're elected PM of a country, you do have to actually consider the practical considerations of your constituents. Yes.
Well, he wasn't elected as Prime Minister before
the
Second World War.
He wasn't.
No, but I'm saying in the 1930s when he became 1940 technically. When he became Prime Minister the first time, he was not elected to that position. He could have just done a deal with Hitler, couldn't he? If that would have been the most practical solution. Like, he wasn't... Either way, dude, there's no need to die. There's no need to die on this hill, okay? He wasn't an anti-fascist. He just wasn't.
Absolutely... He's the greatest Briton of all time. We voted on this. This is settled history.
We voted on this. We voted on this. What the fuck are you talking about? So the stupid show 100 Greatest Britons decided they was... Okay, do you also agree that John Lennon is the second most important Briton of all time then? Because we voted on it, right? John Lennon came second. So is John Lennon the second greatest Briton of all time?
That is what the poll said.
You're a lunatic. What are you talking about? There's no way you think that John Lennon is the second greatest Briton of all time. There's not a chance, okay? I don't know why you feel the need, why you back yourself into these weird fucking corners.
Where would you rank him?
John Lennon?
34th?
69th. 420th. It's irrelevant. Trying to rank people in that way is fucking ludicrous. Also, recency bias is crazy because they had David Beckham at like number 17, which is fucking just mind-numbingly stupid. Like, that poll is irrelevant. I don't care. Churchill will not be voted the number one Briton in all time in 100 years' time or 500 years' time. Okay? He was a British warlord. That's what happened there. He wasn't an anti-fascist.
The British warlord he did more to oppose fascism than you or I have ever done or ever will do.
Well, in a practical sense, that's true. Yes, he did. He led the country during a difficult period. But he wasn't doing it because he was anti-fascist. Again, I do have to reiterate that point. The fact that they were fascist was circumstantial. They could have been communist. They could have been communist. They could have been liberal. They could have been fucking space aliens. It's irrelevant. They were a competitor. They were a threat. That's it.
That's true, because remember, after the Second World War, he wanted to go to war with the communists immediately. He was then voted out of power, and by the time he got back in, the commies had nukes, so that wasn't an option. He was the only person with the foresight to see we have to deal with the Soviet Union before they get nuclear weapons, otherwise we'll be stuck in the corner.
They called it Operation Unthinkable for a reason, because they weren't actually going to do it.
Because only a man like Churchill could think of it.
Well, not really.
By the way, he was right. The fact that they didn't do that,
well, no, he wasn't right. No, he wasn't right because the fucking Red Army was massive. No, dude. Yeah, Britain didn't have nuclear weapons. Britain didn't have nuclear weapons. First, at the end of the First World War, they didn't even know that they worked at the time because they hadn't even fucking dropped one yet, and they didn't even have one that could have been dropped in Europe at this point. You're so wrong. It's untrue. It would have started an even more calamitous version of the Second World War, because the Red Army was massive and rapacious. It would have been a fucking bloodbath. How could that possibly have been better than anything?
Cold War, where the entire...
Well, no, the Cold War was bad, don't get me wrong, and Stalinist USSR was a fucking disgrace upon humanity. But my point is, the idea that Churchill, being a fucking warmongering lunatic, thought, oh, let's just push through and go against the Red Army. It would have been millions and millions of dead people. You're insane.
And if things had gone slightly differently during the Cold War, there wouldn't be anyone left alive on Earth at all.
Well, yeah, but what do
you mean? In order to prevent the communists from getting to the nuclear bomb, absolutely, I think they should have bitten the bullet and said, "We go to war now. We destroy Moscow. We level Stalingrad. We get rid of it all." And by the way,
well, firstly, Stalingrad
was
already flattened. The Luftwaffe had seen to that already.
Well, salt the earth, make sure nothing can grow there. And by the way, we are still dealing with the consequences.
So you just want to do genocide against Slavs? You're actually like Hitler. You're actually doing the Hitler Ostplan thing.
Do you realise we are still dealing with the consequences of the Soviet nuclear arsenal? The Soviet nuclear arsenal...
We're dealing with the American fucking nuclear arsenal too.
The fact that Vladimir Putin has those nukes, which he inherited from the Soviet Union, is why we can't just tell him to get out of Ukraine. We are still dealing with the consequences of the Soviets being able to build up a nucking arsenal. Do
you think the Russians wouldn't have gotten nuclear weapons by now regardless?
Not if we'd killed them all.
If you'd killed all 200 million of them?
Well, you don't need to kill all of them. Just decapitate the leadership, balkanize it up into smaller countries, and make sure that there's no infrastructure sophisticated
libertarian
to actually build it all.
I want you to just listen to this, people. Listen to the nonsense this creature is spewing, and know that they call themselves a libertarian.
Reactionary libertarian monarchist, to be clear.
Well, reactionary, certainly, yes.
The alternative is the world we're living in now, which
is one of the most peaceful times in the history of the fucking species.
tell that to the people in Ukraine.
I'm not saying there's no war happening. I'm saying compared to virtually any other period in history, we live in the most peaceful time. Of virtually any time since we lived in fucking communes of virtual apes, right? That's.
I do think there is something to be pointed out here. We now live in a time when, yes, wars are less frequent, but when they are fought as total wars. There is a distinction between the wars of the Middle Ages, which were chivalrous and just and restrained, and the total wars of the modern period.
You're a clown. That's the dumbest thing. They were chivalrous and justified, were they?
They were chivalrous, just, and restrained. Contrast that with the total war that nations practice now.
The Crusades. The Crusades were just and fair, were they?
Which ones specifically? If you're
any of them, pick your favourite. I don't really care.
Well, I would say the Albigensian Crusade was going a bit far.
Well, okay, the ones in the Middle East then, rather than the one in Albi in France. That's a slightly. All the Northern Crusades, they don't care. I'm talking about European Christians going to the Holy Land and
to defend pilgrims and
slaughtering Muslims,
defending the right of pilgrims to make pilgrimage.
For the vast majority of the time, they had the right to do so anyway. It wasn't a defensive war in any respect. They weren't defending anybody, and they ended up slaughtering.
They were defending pilgrims' rights to make a holy pilgrimage without being
which they had the right to do. They had the right to do. There were Christians living in Jerusalem at the time.
Well, not after the Crusades were done. Not very many of them.
Oh, there weren't many Jews or Muslims either, because they fucking streets flowed with the blood of people. It's not just.
Yeah, I'm not saying nobody ever got carried away.
Got carried away? They went in there and purposefully killed every fucker they saw. What do you mean carried away?
How would you describe that, then, if not getting carried away?
Well, genocidal. Brutal. Okay, evil.
Okay, they got genocidally carried away then. The point being, they started out with noble intentions, and
no, they didn't. They didn't start off with fucking noble intentions. They intended to do war crimes. They intended to kill people. They intended to take over and drive out the disbeliever, even though the disbeliever had been living there way before Christianity even existed.
Islam wasn't around until I think
Judaism
about the 4th
was.
century.
Judaism was.
Yeah, and they weren't doing it with the express purpose of getting rid of the Jews. That just sort of
they just sort of happened to kill loads and loads of Jewish people and banish them from the city that they had created. Yeah.
Again, no one's saying there weren't miscommunications along the way.
It wasn't a miscommunication. They specifically wanted to do this. They were doing pogroms against Jews in Europe on the way to the Holy Land. This was intrinsically anti-Semitic.
Yeah, as I'm saying, people.
It wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't a miscommunication.
Number of enthusiastic men. Those things are unfortunately common. You see the same thing in.
It's not common. No. Whoa. It's not common.
Football. Have you ever seen what a city looks like after a football game?
Well, yes, it doesn't have piles of Jewish bodies.
Want to engage in something? There is an unfortunate tendency for this to happen.
No. There's a difference between a bit of a scrap where someone might get stabbed or like bricked or something, and literally the streets of a city flowing with the blood of slaughtered people.
Well, the difference is one of scale and duration and how long the whole
different
thing
things. Yeah, well, that is my point. Different things are different. Yes, that is actually my fundamental contention.
And I think it's absolutely fair to say that honestly, the Crusader kings should probably have done a bit more to prevent their troops from getting carried away and stay on task and stay on mission. That is absolutely a reasonable critique to make. But it's quite a leap from that to say that the Crusades weren't justified in the first place.
Dude, you literally said they got genocidally carried away. Already,
and that was bad.
And you've already conceded the point. This is just fucking. It's jibber jabber at this point. You're just saying fucking sounds out of your face. That's it.
Well, you're saying that if someone gets carried away, that automatically means that their initial good intentions don't count?
They didn't have good intentions. There were no good intentions here. It was intrinsically imperialist. It was intrinsically murderous. It was intrinsically anti-Semitic from the very beginning.
I don't think it was intrinsically imperialist. These people were spending huge amounts of money.
They created fucking Crusader states. The Levant was covered in Crusader kingdoms.
Yes,
what do you mean it wasn't imperialist?
How else could they possibly have attempted? What could they possibly have done? Starting out with the intention of protecting the rights of pilgrims in the area.
They didn't start out with the intention of helping pilgrims. That's obviously not true.
That's explicitly why Pope Boniface said, "Go do this thing, please." That was the explicit reason Pope Boniface said.
Why did taking the cross mean that they were absolved of all sins, including sins they would commit on the road if they weren't intending to commit sins on the road?
Well, it's like blanket amnesty, isn't it? It's like
yeah, so you're allowed to do war crimes. He's absolutely saying, if you take the cross here, I will give you a remission of your sins, including sins you commit in the Holy Land, which means you can go and do war crimes. It's an intrinsic admission that you know they're going to do war crimes, and you're letting them away with it before they even do it.
No, and you know why it's not that? Because, and again, this is a legitimate criticism of the Catholic Church at the time, the same criticism Martin Luther made. They were unfortunately very, very keen to get favors from people by promising them absolution from sin. They did the same thing with the buying of indulgences, which is what Martin Luther
but there's a different
while that's bad, it's not out of character for the general action of the Catholic Church at the time.
I'm not even saying the sale of indulgences or anything like that. If he'd forgiven their sins up to that point, that's one thing. When you give them essentially a blank check to commit any crimes they want to, any sins at all they want to, including rape, murder, genocide, anything you like, right? Until they return home. So basically, whilst you're away, do whatever you like, go fucking crazy, lads, and then when you come back, that is a blank check to commit war crimes, which he knew they were going to do intrinsically because he wanted them to go and do that. He wanted Christianity to go and dominate that region.
Now you're assuming a level of malice that I don't think you have evidence for. Sure, in hindsight, was that a likely outcome? Yes, but he didn't have the benefit of hindsight.
Yes, he did. He knew full well what they were going to do. He knew what he was asking them to do.
How could he possibly have done that? How could he possibly have done that?
My dude, why would he feel the necessity to give them a blank check like that for their sins if he didn't think they were going to commit sins? If he thought they weren't going to go and do that, they were just going to go over and ask nicely and maybe you'll be fine. They'll sit down in the free marketplace of ideas with Saladin and just come up with a nice solution to the problem. No, he knew full well what they were going to do.
It was very likely he wasn't going to see them again. He knew it was very likely that even just normally travelling over large distances at that time carried a risk of death. Right. He knew it was very likely these men he was sending off he wouldn't see again.
It wouldn't matter.
So he tried to cover his bases.
No, he's not covering his bases. He's covering their bases. He can remit sins
at a distance
he can't
very well
his fucking
grant them absolution after the fact.
Yeah, you can. Of course you fucking can.
He can't very well grant...
Absolutely he can.
Not if they die when they're there and don't come back.
Right, but the point is, why was he giving them that remission of preemptive remission of sins if he didn't think or it wasn't a wink wink nudge nudge go and commit the crimes? That that's true. You're just deciding to die on this hill because you're a fascist who hasn't worked it out.
I think you're assuming malice to what I think could perhaps more accurately be considered not thinking it all the way through on his part. Yeah, he probably should have applied a little bit more consideration to it and applied a few more caveats to.
You think a guy with a direct line to God would have been able to work that shit out? You should have asked God.
I mean, to be clear, I'm not religious. I'm an atheist. I don't think he was hearing voices from God. Okay. I'm sorry, were you under the impression that I was religious?
No, I'm taking the piss. I'm also not religious. I'm suggesting that, if he's got a direct
line
with
so
God,
he was just a man doing the best he could with the limited information available to him. And while we may fault him, it is a little unfair, I think, to utterly condemn him for not predicting every outcome of his actions.
Okay, someone in chat has asked, I don't know if this is true. Did you once say that you wanted to get pegged by Margaret Thatcher?
Out of context, irrelevant.
So that's a yes then. Okay. Dude, I'm not even fucking shaming you for the pegging. I'm shaming you for the Margaret Thatcher bit. What's up with that?
She did help keep our inflation under control, and she did keep the Falklands.
Is that the
You
point?
got to credit her for that.
Is that the point? Is that really the point there? Is that how you choose your sexual partners, based on political record? It's a bit. I mean, look, I think it's based that you want to get pegged in the first place. Good for you, but Margaret Thatcher. Also, she's dead, so that's not happening, my dude.
I mean, I may have been, I may have been thinking more about that time Gillian Anderson played her in that.
I see. Now, getting pegged by Gillian Anderson, that's a different
the
thing
point
entirely.
being,
Yeah.
The point being, it's irrelevant.
It is irrelevant, but it is also fun.
Also, wait, what do you mean, the chat? Are you streaming this?
Yes. What?
Oh.
Did you not know I was streaming this?
May have been mentioned in the messages. I'll double check.
I assumed you would know that was the case.
I set up this group to iron out the details.
Did you not want this to be streamed?
I don't mind it being streamed. Yeah, your friend Bilderberg, he mentioned you were a Twitch. Yeah, he said that you were a Twitch streamer.
Yeah,
and he just said he wanted to have a conversation with you. He said that you do a stream on Fridays, so Friday would be a bad time. I kind of assume that that's why you were doing this when you weren't streaming. I don't mind that you're streaming.
Oh no,
this.
No. He meant that I
thought you just wanted to have a conversation.
I do a regular stream with my friend Christy on Fridays. Like I stream most days.
No,
it's just that I was busy Friday, so I couldn't do Friday specifically. Okay, I genuinely apologise for that misunderstanding. That wasn't my intention.
I think we just got wires crossed. But no, I'm fine. I
wasn't trying to blindside you with anything.
Stream. No, I was on Gremlo's stream. I was on Kettle's stream. I don't. Yeah. So unintentional blindsiding. Again, people don't always see the outcome of their actions, and it's not malice. It's just the miscommunication. Particularly, we have to point out in the case of the Pope back then, most people didn't speak Latin. He was talking to a vast multilingual audience in a time when most people were illiterate. You are going to get miscommunications then. It's almost inevitable that you're going to get some miscommunications.
Okay.
And I think it's a little harsh to judge him for everything that those miscommunications resulted in, and say, it's one thing to say he should have thought a bit more about potential outcomes of his actions. It's another thing to say that he's 100% accountable for everything that they did.
Bilderberg
yes, people got carried away. And
Bilderberg says
he arguably should have done more to prevent it.
Okay. Bilderberg says sorry if it wasn't communicated properly. So
I did. When I initially read the message, I thought he said, "I've got this friend. He's a Twitch streamer. He'd like to have a conversation with you, but he can't do it on Friday because that's when he streams."
Yeah.
So my impression from that was, oh, so this wouldn't be a stream. You just wanted to have a conversation with me and couldn't do it in streaming. I don't mind. I'm quite to continue doing this at least for a couple of hours. I kind of want to get to bed. You okay if we finish this at 9? Because I'd like to have something to eat and then get to bed.
That's fine. Well, you can finish whenever we like. We don't have to have a set time. We can finish now if you wanted to. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or clarify from your?
Well, yeah, in monarchism in general, I can go into some more detail about why I think monarchism is a good system. I'd like to know why you think it's a bad system. When I talked to Keffels, she genuinely seemed to she was anti-authoritarianism, but her definition of authoritarian was just unelected, which I think is a rather crude definition.
Okay, I don't want to speculate on what Keffels does or doesn't think. But I mean,
so why do you?
My opposition to monarchy isn't that it doesn't work. So when you say is it a bad system or a good system, it's a system that works clearly. It has for the vast majority of human history. I just think we've come up with something fairer, something more in tune with humanity, something less alienating than monarchy, which is republicanism. So that's why I advocate for that. It's not that monarchism can't work or is intrinsically the worst system. It's just a bad system.
Okay, but the worst periods in British history was the period when we were a republic under Oliver Cromwell. So that was the system which I would argue to the absolute highest degree
I don't know
as a nation exemplified those things.
I don't know that you can realistically call that.
We've never had a worse leader than the leader we had when we were a republic.
I don't know that you can. Well, that I would very strongly contend that point. But regardless, I don't know that you can realistically call it a monarchy when it's an unelected dictator who hands over power to his son.
I don't call it a monarchy. I call that a republic.
But that's
I call Oliver Cromwell a republican.
Hereditary monarchy. It's just one monarch superseding another monarch.
He didn't have a crown. He didn't claim that he.
Neither does the dickheads in North Korea.
Say, well,
neither did the dickheads in North Korea, and that's clearly a fucking hereditary monarchy. They don't call themselves king, but they don't have to.
Officially, that's a republic. It's a coincidence.
Well, officially, it's
some of the leaders have been relatives.
Officially, okay, coincidence. Officially, it's also democratic. Would you say it's democratic?
Yeah, we did see all those people weeping when Kim Jong Il died.
You were just a troll. Come on, dude. Are you just trolling?
Consent is easier to manage.
Is that a shit post? Are you just doing shit posting now?
I'm being honest here. Have you heard of a guy named Noam Chomsky? We had to learn about him in university when we were studying the theory of languages for language and hearing. He has this concept called manufacturing consent.
I'm well aware of it.
Under certain circumstances, certainly with modern communication infrastructure, but to some extent even before it, it's possible for a sufficiently charismatic person in a republic to manufacture approval for a given position, a given political position.
Right.
That is a known and well-established failure state for democracy. It's something that republics can end up doing. And in a republic, there is a tremendous incentive to do that.
That's a lot of words for very little progress in the conversation.
So
do I think leaders,
that the majority
are the leaders? No. I don't give a fuck what you think the majority of Koreans think. Have the North Korean people ever been actually asked their opinion in a private, fair, free election who their leader should be?
Private, fair, and free are additional qualifiers. You're adding those on.
Okay, but that's what I would consider to be a democracy. Just the baseline for a democracy. Do you disagree?
You've excluded the majority of democracy throughout history. Yes, the original democracies were the Greek city-state democracies. Do they not count? If the definition of democracy you're applying...
No, not by the modern standards. They're not democratic, no.
They're the ones that invented the term. That's ridiculous.
Don't get me wrong. It was a step forward. It was a step forward, but have we not progressed slightly beyond ancient Greece?
What do you mean by...
Do you not think we can hold ourselves to higher standards than the first people who ever did it?
And this is my problem. You're a Whig. You subscribe to Whig historicism.
No, I've got all my own hair.
History is a continuous upwards... No, Whig with an H.
No,
W-H-I-G.
I know.
That is the problem.
I'm joking. Yes.
Fair enough.
So you're basically just calling me a liberal. You're calling me a liberal.
I'm calling you a Whig. Very specifically, you have a Whig view of history. This idea of constant upward growth. You don't seem to
not constant.
Believe in the idea that actually maybe...
Not constant. We talked about the Second World War. I would suggest that was a significant dip for humanity. But I think we've come out of that and moved forward. We are significantly more progressed, I think, socially speaking, than ancient Greece, yes.
To quote the incredibly famous Whig Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards progress. Would that be something you agree with?
True, but he also said he liked big butts and he couldn't lie.
That is
so, I don't know what to believe.
Well, everyone's right about something.
True.
But my point is that is intrinsically a Whig point of view.
Okay, but I don't care.
That is the point of view.
I don't give a fuck that that's a Whig point of view. What difference does that make to anything? What? How does that alter what I said? How is that a critique of what I said? You've broken
Does
up
your
again.
idea that we
You
should be
broke
altering
up.
the definition of democracy?
You
can't-
completely
Your
broke.
idea that we should alter the definition of... Weirdly, I can still hear you. This is the thing. I think my upload speeds are getting choked, but my download speeds are fine. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Here am I sitting in a... Okay, you can hear me now.
I
Right.
can.
Sorry, I think my upload speeds are getting choked, but my download speeds are fine because I can hear you.
Do you like being choked?
That No, I like oxygen. So here is my point, my objection. Your view of history is fundamentally Whiggish, and I think that does influence how
Would you
you
say,
view
would you
things.
say I'm a
Your
Whigger?
definition of democracy...
Would you say I'm a Whigger?
That's not a term.
With a hard H, yeah?
No, the term is just Whig. The term for a
No, I'm not.
person
I'm
who
joking.
believes in the Whig theory of history is just a Whig.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so I'm a Whig. Okay.
Yeah, the term is just... Yes. I mean, you're a bad person. You have other positive qualities that offset that. But I think that has influenced your view. The idea that democracy, rather than being an ideal created by its inventors that societies may be judged against, is somehow there's some sort of forward progress, as though the inventors of democracy had written down some ideal state for democracy to be in, and what we've just gradually been bending towards that over time.
Right.
There's no particular reason to believe that's the case. I don't think that the idea of free, fair, private elections is necessarily a prerequisite to it. I'd argue that a lot of things that... Yeah.
Would you even claim that the North Korean state would even meet the definition of democracy under the ancient Greek sense?
I
Even by the standards of the ancient world, would that even qualify as a democracy?
They might consider him what the Athenians would have called a tyrant, but there were cases where Athens did have a tyrant. They might consider Kim Jong-un to be a tyrant, as in one man holding a large amount of executive and legislative power.
Yeah.
But I don't think that necessarily is incompatible with calling it a democracy. It even has democratic in its name.
Oh God, you're doing the fucking
It is the Democratic People's...
Yeah, that's the joke. Not the joke. The point is that just because they have it in their name doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean the Democratic Republic of Congo calls itself democratic and isn't. The United States calls itself united and isn't.
What makes you think the Congo isn't democratic?
Its lack of democracy in terms of electing its fucking government. Like, these aren't democracies, my dude. They're just not.
Well, come on, Leopold's been in charge for over 100 years. What are you complaining about now? If we were talking about when Leopold was
just
still in charge...
Just because they've replaced a black tyrant or a white tyrant with a black tyrant doesn't make it better. I don't want African dictatorships. I want African democracies. Like, what the fuck?
Would you consider Nazi Germany to be a democracy?
No. Absolutely not. Would you?
But Hitler was elected.
Well, not really. Under any realistic sense. Not really, no.
In that they've...
Like, it was constitutional. Don't get me wrong. It was
power in a parliamentary...
It was constitutional initially. But I would argue that's still not really democratic. And
he was the one able to form a coalition.
And B, he very quickly removed all democracy. So no, it wasn't.
What does that mean? Removed all democracy?
Literally, they didn't even bother using the Reichstag after like 1935. There was no elected.
Because it was
government.
Yeah, because it was fun. They didn't have fresh elections, but most countries don't have elections in the middle of a war. Ukraine is.
They weren't at war.
Is Ukraine not a democracy?
No, the war didn't start until 1939. They stopped having elections long before.
That's just historically ignorant. No, come on, dude. That's being historically ignorant. We didn't join the war until 1939. That doesn't mean the war didn't start.
No. Okay. They weren't being physically attacked.
We were
No German
comparatively
territory.
party.
No German territory was under any threat until 1939. The fucking Sudetenland didn't invade Germany, did it? It was the other way around.
No,
so
but
they could have
Hitler
held an
claimed-
election.
No, but Hitler. No, but if you would actually listen to what I'm saying, you have to think about it from their point of view. Remember, they were ethno-supremacists. They didn't see themselves as a constitutional government. They saw themselves as a government that existed for a German people. That
Okay,
was
but
their
they didn't let Aryans vote either.
No,
it
but
wasn't
again,
like they
you have
had
to look
looking
at this.
Aryans only
Would
election.
you listen to me?
Okay, say the dumb thing you're going to say. Go on.
The argument that the war didn't begin until 1939 is true for us. But when you think about how the actual National Socialist German Workers' Party thought about Germany, thought about it themselves as a state, they saw themselves as a state of an ethnos, as a state of a people. And they saw their people as being under attack. Now, to some extent, this was drummed up propaganda to justify the war.
To some extent.
To some extent, it was something they actually believed. To some extent, it was something they actually believed. They believed that their ethnos was under attack, and therefore,
And that
in a
means
pretty
they can't
meaningful
vote.
sense, you could argue that they were in a state of war from the moment they got into power.
So they couldn't vote
And in a very
because...
real sense, they considered themselves to be.
So they couldn't have a vote because
under their own conception
because of the Jews.
what they were. Yes, because under their own conception of what they were a state at war. We would not consider them to be a state at war. They considered themselves to be, though. And that does have to be factored in.
No, it doesn't.
When
it doesn't.
When you're considering
fascist being wrong about things does not have to be factored in. I don't give a fuck.
States that are in a condition of war generally do not hold elections. Ukraine is not holding elections while it's under invasion. Does that mean it's undemocratic?
America did. America was having a civil war and had a fucking election.
America is very unusual in that regard.
America is very unusual, to be fair. That is true.
Yes, in that regard, America is actually quite unusual. And certainly, some of the things America did during wartime, like suspending habeas corpus, which, to be fair, the Confederate States did that too. And I think.
Oh, we're going to get a War of Northern Aggression meme. Go on, do a War of Northern Aggression meme for us. Look, there isn't there isn't an authoritarian state you haven't defended. So go for it.
Don't be an idiot. What do you mean War of Northern Aggression? They fired on Fort Sumter. You realize being a right-winger does not mean I'm obliged to support every idiotic thing that any right-winger has ever agreed in.
Oh, no, but the point is that every authoritarian, be it a nominally leftist or nominally rightist state that we've mentioned so far, you have actually fucking defended. You've defended North Korea, you've defended Nazi Germany, you've defended the Soviet Union, you've defended fucking everything.
I didn't defend them. I said I didn't defend the Soviet Union. If you recall, earlier I was saying that we should have engaged Operation Unthinkable.
Oh, so no, you defended Stalinism in your conversation with Keffels, didn't you? Yes. But you said that North Korea was democratic, which is one of the most farcical things you've said, and that's really saying something.
That's not a defense, though, because I don't necessarily consider democracy to be good. And I didn't defend
I know
Stalin.
you don't. I know you don't. Yeah.
I pointed out it would not have been practical for him to have what you would consider to be a fair election. I'm saying that the means to have a fair election in Russia at that point in history physically did not exist. Due to how diffused and how spread out the population was.
They could have had
due to the fact that it was still in a state of war to a large extent. This was when the whites were still fighting. And honestly, I wish they'd won. There was this guy.
Are you being anti-white?
No, I'm being pro-white. The White Army, I wish they'd won. There was this really cool guy. They called him the Bogd Khan. He was incredibly cool. I wish he'd won. But the point is,
again, you're supporting was it the 7 nations that invaded the Soviet Union? Or technically it was just Russia at the time.
I am supporting the martyred Nicholas. I'm supporting the martyred Romanovs. Yes,
martyred.
I am outright saying the Romanovs should have stayed in power. The Soviet Union should never have arisen. And it's some consolation that Anastasia managed to get away to
No, she didn't.
But still, never...
No. This has been conclusively disproven. They found the bones. No fucking princess escaped. They've all been accounted for.
She went to Galarian and she runs the nation of Irizm now.
What?
She survived, but the rest of them were killed, and I absolutely believe that was
Can we
that
get
was
some
the sin
lols
that
in
damned
chat for the dead
humanism.
Romanovs? Because fuck them. Cunts. What are you
What?
talking about?
Okay, now you're defending killing children? What's wrong with you?
I wouldn't have killed them, but the fact that they're all dead is funny. I'm just going to say it. They'd have been fucking despots as well. What?
But they weren't despots. None of them were. They were
Dude,
just
you were in
leaders.
favour of killing all of the Russians and fucking salting the ground. Don't you get trying to
I
take
was
the
in
fucking
favour.
moral high horse here?
Once it was taken over by communists, yes, that was tragically necessary. It would have been necessary to break it up into multiple smaller countries, preferably each of them.
So
with
you
their
want
own
to
monarch.
kill? So okay, I laughed about the killing of like 3 children, which is a bit rough, admittedly. But you are unironically arguing that they should have killed tens of millions of children. You're a psychopath. I don't know what to say. You said it all for me.
I'm
I guess.
saying we are still dealing with the consequences of Soviet nuclear buildup. And it looks like the only way that could have been prevented would have been to decisively attack them before they had the ability to breach that technology gap. I'm saying that, yes, it would have been better to have risked a large-scale war with the Soviet Union immediately after the Second World War,
Can I
rather
ask
than
you?
allow them to build up a nuclear arsenal.
Well, you mentioned.
Because we are still paying the price for that.
Well, that's the thing. You
nuclear arsenal.
mentioned Ukraine earlier. What's your take on the whole Ukraine sitch?
It's a really unfortunate situation. We unfortunately can't support them too much without Putin just going, right, I'm going to go straight for the nuclear bombs. But it's a terrible situation. You know, my heart goes out to those people, and
Which people?
you know, the people in Ukraine being.
No, I'm just wondering.
And also, to be fair, the political dissidents in Russia who are against the war and are being mistreated by the Russian state because of it.
Fair enough. You know what? That's the one not mental answer you've given tonight. That's fine. I don't have much to add to that. Ukraine has broken so many people's brains, but like, for some reason,
there's some people online who have taken the nut job idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend to such a ridiculous position that they are now defending evil. And I like fair. Your side does this too, to a large extent, but there are people on my side that do that, and I disavow.
Fair enough. You know what? That's fine. Should we end? Should we end on a note of agreement?
Yeah, I think we can end on that.
Yeah.
I don't ask your chat. Have they got any final questions?
Any
like nothing
final
meany or stupid? But they've got any genuine political questions?
Well, I will ask any mean or stupid questions as well. Okay. So ask away, chat. Have we got anything else? Pick the mind of one of the great intellects of our age, for free, no doubt. Anything in chat from people? Mostly people saying no, which is just that's more rude than I was expecting. Want to take this places? Ask how the Illuminati are involved in all of this. Are you a conspiracy person?
Is it a conspiracy when they're doing it all out in the open? Like, look at Klaus Schwab. That guy dresses like a Sith Lord.
Are you into race play as a kink?
No.
No. Okay.
Kind of frustrating that. Yeah, I'm not really my thing. Unfortunately, I see a lot of that on the internet.
What are you into?
But it's generally
just
not
out of
tagged.
interest. Because you put there's a lot of like your Twitter. I can't show your Twitter on screen because it would break terms of service. But you've got you do tweet some interesting things, some very erotic things. You're a sexual person, aren't you?
I wouldn't say. I retweet all sorts of things on Twitter. So I think what percentage of things are represented in my Twitter feed is just a representation of what Twitter in general is like.
So what kind of? I mean, it is very personal, so you don't have to answer. But what is your bag? What's your kink situation? What's that about?
I will, as the Americans say, plead the fifth.
Fair enough. That's absolutely fine. What do you think of the Jews?
Not a fan of that whole circumcision thing. I mean, if adult Jews want to get circumcised, sure. I don't think they should be allowed to do it to kids.
For a second, honestly.
Again, that gets back to our...
Oh, you
that
scared
gets
me
back
there.
to the first thing we were talking about, where individual human rights. If an adult Jew says, according to my beliefs about, what was it, Moses' covenant with God, or was it Abraham's covenant with God? One of them had some covenant with God. If he says, I'm going to honor that and take off my foreskin, an adult Jew has every right to do that.
What about baby Jew?
I don't think he has a right to do that to his son. I don't think he has a right to do that to his son.
So the baby Jews leave the dicks alone, is the message, yeah?
Yep. When they come of age, if they have a talk with their rabbi or their Pharisee or whatever it is in the specific denomination, because there's so many. There's like Reform, and there's Orthodox, and there's New Style, and there's Messianic. There's so many different
Gothic
variations. But whatever the no, that's something different. Gothic is something different.
Hip hop Jews.
But yeah. Do you mean the Black Hebrew Israelites?
Fucking hell.
I'm actually not sure what their stance on circumcision is, honestly.
Oh.
Are you still there?
Spiritually no, but physically yes, I think. Anyway, okay. Yes, let's leave it there, I think, before any more things get said. I think that's fair. Thank you for coming on. Yeah, this has been, I'll say, enlightening. Yeah, we'll go with that.
I do like some of their bread, though. I'll say that about the Jews. I like bagels. I've tried some of those flatbreads, although I think actually those might be Arabic.
Yeah, let's leave it there. Yeah, the Jews do good bread. Cool. Thank you.
I prefer the risen stuff. What is it, leavened bread that's like yeast in it? But bagels or a bit of flatbread every now and again, that's nice. But yeah, I just think circumcision should be a decision adults make, not a decision that is made for children by adults.
Okay. Thank you for coming on. This has been fucking insane. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening.
You're welcome. Yours too. Have a nice week.
Bye-bye.
Oh,
oh shit. It just cut him off. I didn't mean to do that. Honestly, I didn't know. Oh, fucking hell, man. Honestly, I nearly had a fucking heart attack. When I asked him, what do you think about the Jews? And he said, I'm not a fan of that whole... And I thought he was going to say, like, that whole group of people. I thought he was just going to go full, like, fuck the Jews bit. But he went, that whole circumcision thing. And it just, oh my God. Oh, fuck me. That was... how did that... What the fuck is going on? What... can we just... I'll get to this in a second. So we're going to watch the Keffels thing. Because I'd lined that up because he turned up late. So we'll... Yeah. I'll just put this back on screen for a second. What the fuck was that? Did everyone enjoy that? Yeah. That was... It was fucking crazy. He's fucking insane. He's insane, isn't he? Oh, 9 months. Thank you, Adam, altogether. Thank you, everyone, for gifting subs and bits and stuff. I had to focus on the thing. Enjoy your post-birth baby Bible abortion. Boom shakalaka. Oh, fuck me. Motherfucker had me sarcastically arguing in favour of pederasty. Like, what the fuck? I don't know what to say to that. Oh my God. What the fuck is this clip? Oh, it's a clip. What do you think of the Jews?
not a fan of that whole circumcision thing. I mean, if adult Jews want to get circumcised, sure.
Honestly, I nearly fucking died, mate. Oh, he is a sexual person. I was trying to be polite about it but he's into some weird kinky shit, man. He's into some stuff. If you go out and check out his fucking Twitter page, it's just fucking mental. Oh, it's so mad. There was one he tweeted today. I didn't want to get too personal with it, but there's one he tweeted today, and it was too. The dude standing up was dressed as a furry creature. I don't know what creature it was, with his cock and bollocks hanging out. And the woman had a shitty diaper on, and the man was saying, "If you want to get out of that shitty diaper, you're going to have to suck better than that." And she's filleting him. In a cartoon, well, there's no way I can show that on screen, right? That cartoon. He retweeted that. He just retweeted it, That's Cybersmith's Twitter account, yeah. What the? Okay, he's just tweeting out some sissy porn. Literally some sissy porn there. That's someone being whipped on the arse. There's some painted miniatures. There's a trans girl with a massive cock. Yeah, there's